So generational trauma is very similar to what I was just talking about with DNA. But typically with generational trauma, there is a generation gap. So it's the baby boomers, those that experienced the Great Depression, those who the baby boomers, the Gen X, those that whole generation was known as the latchkey kids, right? There was a whole amount of neglect that went on, emotional neglect, physical neglect. And so generational trauma is not just the generations in our family, but how those things have been passed down. So fears about not having enough if you have a grandparent who went through the depression. We're honestly seeing now, as I'm filming this, we're in the middle of a pandemic. And if there are people that survived the first pandemic, the Spanish flu in 1918, which of course is rare since we're almost 100 years, over 100 years later, but there are people that have experienced it. Those people are having a different experience than we are. So when you deal with generational trauma, it's not just generations in your family, but it's what that came down and how those generational things were embedded in the family consciously, subconsciously, and in their DNA as well. So all of these, if you are Jewish and you're a descendant of somebody that was in the Holocaust, you have a different type of DNA. Your DNA has been traumatized. This affects you very differently than some other people. The same thing with Native Americans. Um, and other different communist countries and things like that, where there's a lot of oppression. Um, Having those experiences changes who we are, changes because when our ancestors have experiences, they pass those down to us. And again, it's nature and nurture. And so this leads me to about bad habits, lack of self care, self abuse. And we're going to talk about that.